we were friends, and she got disfellowshipped. And she called me to say, I'm sorry, I'm getting disfellowshipped. I'm just letting you know that I'm coming back and I value you. And it was a perfectly nice thing to do. And this shows how much the indoctrination really can make you say some foul things. And this is what I said to her. I said, well, you better hurry up. And this is one of those things where you're taking a shower and you go, oh, I can't believe I said that. But what I said was, well, Kim, you better hurry up and come back, because the Bible says in the new system, we're not going to have any bad feelings. And so that means you're not even going to come to mind. I'm not going to miss you. It was a horrible thing to say, awful thing to say. And that is the strength of the organization. So I'm not just bagging on my mom or parents in general. I did it too, and it was absolutely awful. So welcome back to Difficult Childhood, where we talk about waking up from the organization, also growing up in the organization, and some of the setbacks and also the advantages and successes of our lives after we leave. And you may notice that this is not Fallon next to me. Nope. This is my friend Mike Gonzalez, who also had another episode. Hi, Mike. Welcome.
Thank you for having me back. I appreciate coming back. I will admit that the episode is very therapeutic and helped me still, even after I've been gone for almost 20 years. And talking about it is very, very good for me.
Nice. That's really great to hear. I think it started for me a little bit stressful, and then it got that way too. So that is nice to hear. And I think you helped with your last episode, and we'll link it. A lot of people, because we got a lot of very nice positive feedback about people who went, okay, yeah, someone else was in the position that you were in. So that's great. Well, today we are talking about our mothers and Jehovah's Witness mothers of people who have left everywhere. And it's, to us, we were discussing this because, we chat not related to the podcast. And we're talking about how the organization has done something that is really surprising they've been able to do. And that is change and twist the relationship of a mother to her child. Somehow, they have managed to convince Jehovah's Witness women to shun the children that they love. And I cannot imagine, I'm not a parent, and I cannot imagine particularly what that must be like for a mother. It must be like a death. And I know my mom was extremely upset when I left and hurt. So it's very interesting that the organization has managed to do this. And both of us have mothers who really do fully shun us. And we both have living mothers. So, I mean, obviously, but it's such a tragedy because, for example, Fallon, who's spoken about this on the channel, about 18 months ago, her mother passed away. I believe this is the only time we have. And it's such a shame that the organization has managed this power over Jehovah's Witness mothers. What do you think?
Yeah, it's, I think for a lot of us, especially if you grew up in this religion, because we are so taught to be no part of the world, that means our whole childhood going through school is way different than the other children, and we can't bond with them as easily. So at times we have to go back to our family unit, I think, especially for me.
Right.
The people I was closest to growing up, and for most of my young childhood and adulthood, was my mother and my two sisters. I went probably all my childhood and teenage years without any real friends that were not family members, at least a cousin. But it was, I was very close to my mother, very close to my sisters.
Yeah, it's a really close relationship. I was always closer with my mother growing up than I was with my father. We got along well, and she's absolutely brilliant. She's a super smart woman, and I mean, it shows how that can still happen. You can still be indoctrinated, even though she's just a very intelligent person. And I was really close with her, and it's just strange that I think what we're going to do on this episode is kind of go over some key moments when we went from earlier in our lives when we were very close to how the organization managed to manipulate these people. They're both parents, really, but we're talking about mothers today, into being willing to shun their kids and what that looked like. Because there was a lot of milestones. It wasn't just best friends and then I don't ever want to talk to you again.
Mhm.
So I think we're gonna kind of take that apart a little bit. But you had something interesting we were talking about the other day, where your mother. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that their mother did this to them, or
It,
it wasn't a violence or anything, but it was just a strange thing she did. Can you tell us about that?
I was almost, I would say, probably indoctrinated with this origin story of my life, that worked really well in keeping me in the Jehovah's Witness religion for as long as it did. Because I left about when I was 28, 29, back in 2006, 2007. So
Right.
when I was growing up, and I was trying to think of when I don't remember this story, but sadly, I think this was something she told me from a very, very young age. And it's kind of a two-pronged story. One
Hmm.
is, and I don't want to go into too much detail about what was going on with my mother and her health, because that's her story, but where it comes with me is it was a very difficult pregnancy with me. As she had told me, like, she was in danger of miscarrying me the entire pregnancy. At one point, the doctor wanted to, I guess, do an abortion. Um, and she asked, "Has the baby died?" And the doctor said no. But the baby's going to die tonight or tomorrow, so let's just do it now, as
Wow.
she put it to me. And she fought, and she fought very like, from what she told me, like this was something she fought very hard to have me. And secondly, she always framed it in that Jehovah wanted you to be born, and almost in some way, Jehovah has some purpose for you, uh, because you were supposed to miscarry, but instead you were alive, you're born, and now Jehovah must have some grand plan for you in your life. The second part of the story fits in very well in that she told me that I cannot tell you what age, but 1, 2, 3 years old in that time frame, that she woke up in the middle of the night and she found me on some piece of furniture, like a bookcase, on top of it. And she had no idea how I could have gotten on top. And the only explanation I was ever given was the demons must have lifted me off of my bed or crib and put me on top of this piece of furniture. So when I say two prongs, it's that one, Jehovah wanted you alive for a purpose. Two, Satan's always had an interest in tripping you up so you don't reach
Wow.
this purpose. Um, whether sometimes it was said, sometimes it's just implied, but when they tell you a story like that, I think that ends up being what you think. Um, if you remember when I told you that when I wanted to go to Bethel, I saw this as some sort of Samuel experience. I think that has a lot to do with it. In that,
Right.
well, I'm gay, I can't get married. Well, I have attraction to men and I can't get married. So, like Samuel, maybe Jehovah just wanted me to be in Bethel and serve the rest
Hmm.
of my life in his home. And I think this like origin story made me cling on because me wanting to leave was evidence that Satan was winning. And I know that's something that Jehovah's Witnesses believe, period. But when you're told from a very young age that the only reason you're alive is because Jehovah miraculously saved you, um, it has a little bit more power.
Oh
And
yeah, there's a huge amount of pressure, I would imagine. And
yeah,
I mean, I know what you're saying there about there are certain things that Jehovah's Witnesses teach that could facilitate that belief. But strictly speaking, Jehovah's Witnesses believe in this system, time and unforeseen occurrence befall us all.
mhm,
If a mother loses a baby, God will fix that in the new system. It isn't. They don't believe that God necessarily intervenes. They claim so they try to have it both ways. There's the story
mhm,
of the hurricane or a typhoon that washes up a bunch of sand, and then they can build their kingdom hall. But then other times they say God doesn't save us or protect us physically. So
mhm,
they try to have it both ways. Typically, I remember when my parents really had the approach of, okay, bad things can happen. It's not God's fault because He's going to fix everything in the new system. But your
mhm,
mother kind of took it more of the, okay, God has taken a special interest in my son, and I'm super grateful, and I'm going to
Mhm.
use that to make sure that he is, a Samuel serving at the temple. Is that kind of what the?
That's what it felt like. And it's not something I feel like she told my sisters. I feel like this was reserved for me. I was really close to my mother. She was the type of mom that gave gifts to me all throughout the year. So growing up, I never felt the lack of like birthdays or Christmas because mom always surprised me with gifts. She was a very giving and loving woman. And like that was my relationship with her for almost my entire life up until the years came when I was close to leaving. When I was a teenager, I thought long and hard about leaving the religion. I had gotten a scholarship to Stanford, and my little naive self thought maybe I could use that to escape to California and
Wow.
leave the religion, never really putting two and two together of what that would be like as an 18-year-old who'd been a Jehovah's Witness his whole life and really only hung out with his family. Um, so I came home to tell mom this. I don't want to get into the full story because there's a lot of layers, but when this day finally came up and I actually sat down with my parents and said I didn't want to be a Jehovah's Witness anymore, my mother cried so intensely and seemed so hurt so personally that it really affected me. I felt like a horrible person for putting her through this pain and suffering, and that it was my fault she was hurting. And so I decided kind of that day that I would not pursue this course of action and instead be that son making his mother proud. There's actually a Bible scripture about that. And when I left to Bethel, I made her a little card with a picture of us, and I just wrote in calligraphy that Bible verse about a son will make his mother proud, or however it goes.
That's a huge achievement for any JW family for their son to go to Bethel. That makes them look good in the
Mhm.
congregation. It must have made her really like that was, the ultimate. If you were already pioneering, already a ministerial servant, that's the
Yeah, because
ultimate
because
right
I
there.
went from someone who was thinking about leaving to like turning it around overnight, moving to an English congregation, becoming a ministerial servant, becoming an elder, graduating from college. So I did go to college. Um, that was a big no-no, but we did it. We did it, and even through the whole college, I was like, no, no, no. That I'm a Jehovah's Witness. This is just an opportunity. I'm going to use it to help myself financially in the future, but I'm not going to succumb to college traps. So it was I really just went, took my classes, and left to work. When I left for college and then went to Bethel, like this was, I think my mom saw I was going to cave, and she came to save me. She used an example that she was uh, like an animal saving their young from a lion, Satan being the lion, of course, and that she was going to fight tooth and nail to make sure I stayed a Jehovah's Witness. And I was just very compelled by wanting to make my mother proud of me, wanting to keep this close relationship I had with her. Um, and then, when you do all that, you also get a lot of uh, kudos from everyone you meet for being a pioneer, being a minimal servant, being a Bethelite. Uh,
Oh,
and
I
even if you
remember
go,
that being
yeah.
I was a pioneer ministerial servant, and that was,
Mhm.
the best you could be. I think I turned 18 and I became an MS, and that was just it's all this adulation for a young male. It's not good for our ego.
And a former Bethelite is a tag you carry with you for the rest of your life if
That's
you're a Jehovah's
solid.
Witness. I was there, even if it was for the 10 months I was. I still went. I still got accepted. I still breathe the same air as a governing body. so, so even when I came back, I still had that clout, and my mother could still be proud and say, "My son did go to Bethel, and he's a ministerial servant now, on his way to an elder."
Well, with the adulation, obviously there's a one side of it, which you reached a level I never did get to, but it's the uh, I remember my mother being very proud of me when I got those
Mhm.
spiritual, so-called spiritual milestones. But then I also noticed how confused she was, raising boys that were going through their teen years. And so, like for example, one of my brother had looked at some adult entertainment online. We don't use
Mhm.
the other word on for the algorithm. So he was looking at that, and then he confessed to my dad. But then she shared with me how disconcerting it was for her. And I remember her saying she was, again sitting in her sewing room, and she just said something like, "Why and how could he do this? What did I do wrong when I was raising him?" And it's just like she was completely unaware that a young 18-year-old guy would want to look at nude women, and it didn't make any sense to her. And to me, it showed how the organization influences parents and to be shaming toward their kids when they have natural desires. Whether you agree with looking at adult entertainment or not, certainly, but she was just so shocked and shook by it. And I mean, she just never. Obviously, she was a 50-something-year-old woman that would never enter her mind. But to see her son make this choice just shocked her. And now I'm not saying it was my brother. Now I looked at that stuff plenty of times, but I just never confessed. But she was just so puzzled, and then when I made choices she didn't agree with later in life, I could see that shame culture, and it's like they program us, and particularly parents and mothers, to be willing at a moment's notice to let go of your kid, because I saw it when she was talking about how shocking that was to her. And the only reason she was talking about it to me was because I saw the history on the computer that was being used. And I was like, whoa, okay. And she was so put off by it. And I just saw that the organization was at work to try to immediately get her to release her son if he did something that was, now he wasn't being disfellowshipped or anything for it, but it was already at that early stage just repulsed. This is horrible. Something's defective about him, which of course has utility to in the future for the organization to be able to control parents to shun their children. So I just saw that in a very early stage there.
It's insidious, I think, that the governing body kind of, the way you talked, she was already asking, what did I do to cause this? That if your children act a certain way, it always reflects one way or the other on the parents, and that they're standing in the congregation is always on the line on what your children are doing, almost at any age, I would say. And and then to another level, your eternal salvation is on the line as well if you give into these heart situations that the
Right.
spirit is weak, and this is part of your weakness, is these parental feelings, as told by the governing body, with some of them not having children at all. So there you
Right. Right. It is a strange thing, and I also noticed her readiness to reject when I went through my divorce. She was so ready to reject my soon-to-be ex-wife, Rebecca, and it was strange. I've talked with Rebecca about this, and we actually have an episode about what happened with our marriage with waking up coming up, but. Um, my mother was immediately, all of my soon-to-be ex-wife's photos were off the wall, which kind of I get that somewhat, but she was speaking about her with such disdain and almost contempt. Just, I never liked her. Like, yes, you did. Stop it. But I understand there is a natural desire, inclination for any mother to take the side of their kid if their kid's getting a divorce. Adult child is getting a divorce. But I kind of probed her about this. I said, Rebecca and I our marriage broke up. I couldn't tell her that it was a lot of it had to do with the fact that she woke up 2 years before me from the cult. But she heard that Rebecca wasn't going to meetings, and then that automatically meant that Rebecca must be bad and must be at fault. And that's just not the case, because if anybody's been through divorce, a lot of complex things happen in a relationship. And I said some mean stuff, in the throes of going through it. And Rebecca said some mean stuff too. Neither of us are bad people. Now we're really close friends again. Now that we've had recovery times and therapy and stuff, and being out of that religion. But there was nothing but judgmental or judgment and zero forgiveness. There was no, even from a JW point of view, it should have been, oh gosh, Rebecca isn't going to the meetings. I really hope she gets back to the meetings because I really want what's best for her. It was immediate drop. And that's strange, because for the 14 years before, they got along great. And they were friends.
14. Okay, wow.
I was married for a while. Like most Jehovah's Witnesses, we got married very young. But she didn't see, and I said that to her, inside a marriage, I did things that weren't cool. She did things that weren't cool. And I couldn't share, like I said, the fact that it had so much to do with both of us waking up from the religion. But because my mom didn't know I had any doubts at the time. And it was just so hard for my mom. I said, what happened to forgiveness? Actually, that's what I asked her. I said, I don't understand, because we both had a hard time. Isn't the main drive, one of the main things to be Christ-like and forgive people? And she just kind of sat there and she didn't really have an answer for it.
But
So
that's
it
not
shows how much the organization deviates from, what a lot of people call Christ-like teachings.
but that's not the example they set for parents and their wayward children.
It's true.
The example they give them is the prodigal son. It is to, wait for your broken children to crawl back, desperate for your help, and you, out of the abundance of your loving heart, have decided to give it to them
Hmm.
uh, without, unnecessarily, if you will. Like, this is something undeserved, but because I love you so much, you can come to me when your life is broken. They don't, that is kind of the expectation, I think, parents have when their children leave. It's wait for them to come back broken.
Right.
And it's not forgive. It's not see what I might have done or I am actively doing to hurt my child. It is wait for them to come back broken.
You make a really good point there, and thank you for that. I hadn't really thought about that, but now it's called back something my dad said. He said, when my little brother got disfellowshipped, and my little brother needed extra help just to live and stuff, but he says, any of you other boys get disfellowshipped, that's it. I'm not talking to you. And then I remember him saying something about that story, and then also how, he said it doesn't matter if you are destitute, unless you have a desire to return to God's organization, I want to have anything to do with you. And it was almost like he was hoping that if any of his kids left, that things would go horrible for them. But here I am. I have a job. I have, I work. I have a mortgage. I live in the same house I lived in before. And you have a marriage, and you're successful in your life. And it's really, I think it is really shocking to them that we don't come stumbling back in rags because we were hoping to eat the carob pods of the pigs, like in that
Exactly.
story.
Exactly. And it's stuff I remember, like, talking about it. I remember someone in the congregation, her teenage son had left, and someone was talking to her, and I think I was doing literature, so I could hear the conversation.
Hmm.
I think her comment was like, "Well, we're just waiting for the world to kick them all these down, and then they'll come back." That is what that,
Whoa.
again, insidious
Hmm.
video about disfellowshipped people. That's the tale they tell there too. Like, you cannot give in. Wait for them to come begging for it, and they'll appreciate you that much more. Um, which is kind of mind-boggling because uh, I'm like you. The resentment I have built up over 20 years, it's kind of high.
Yeah.
Like if there could be no, I have tried to think about, not because I want to, but like if I was going to give my mother this prodigal son ending, like how would I even just look at them and say, you guys didn't even ask where I was for 2 decades? It's a big thing. It's a big thing.
And again, I will recognize that I think it. My mother used to say, uh, it's a perfect day. I've seen every one of my children today, and now she doesn't get that because of her choices. But I know it upsets her. I know it does, and I know she learned about this channel, and I know that slammed the extra shut. I think that your mother probably feels the same way. I don't obviously know her, but that must be horribly depressing. But it just makes it's more to our point. How was the organization able to do this? It's very strange.
By indoctrination, telling the same stories over and over again, always,
Yep.
always framing it as your salvation is on the line. Um, when I finally did leave the religion, my mother tried to play that same game, you
Hmm.
know, and I just wasn't having it anymore. And I think that's what I remember. If I told you, my mother asked me, "Why are you being so bold all of a sudden?" It's because I had capitulated to her in the past. Um, and she was shocked, maybe even hurt, that these tactics, emotionally manipulative, to be fair, weren't working. And it was a very strange relationship at that point, in this little area where I told them I'm thinking of leaving, but I haven't just yet. And it was filled with very odd conversations. I saw like a different side of my mother I'd never seen before. So I didn't like it all. Very cruel, saying things meant to injure me. Um, and I was like, who is this person? This is like,
Wow.
this is this is not my mother.
That
And
conditional love you can see there,
oh
like
yeah,
it
definitely.
withdraws and becomes manipulative when you won't do the thing that's required.
Yeah,
Stay
and
in.
I think the thing that I was so shocked by, and I'll also throw in my two sisters in this as well. Um, they could see how hurt I was by some things that happened to me in the congregation. They had to have. I cried every day for a year because of certain things that happened. I was so heartbroken. And they never, during this time when I was still in the religion, wanted to talk about it. They knew because some of it was dealt with by latent homosexuality. And they couldn't ever hear me about when I was saying how hurt I was by some things that had happened. It was cruel responses that sadly are kind of the last things I remember about them. Almost overriding our entire, my entire childhood and young adulthood with them is what I remember the most is how they treated me as I was making my decision to leave or not.
And I want to make sure that we're clear that we are not talking bad about women or putting down our mothers at all. It's really more from the perspective of this is how the organization controls people, and we too happen to be particularly close to our respective mothers, and they pulled it off. The organization pulled it off. They managed to get two otherwise loving women to shove us away, and it's a very peculiar thing. I remember, I think we both have stories about a family member passing away. I remember the last time I sat and talked with my mother was in September 2 years ago, and it was at my aunt's hospital. I was really close to my aunt. She and I were great friends, and she was my dad's brother's wife, and she and I went to the hospital to see her before she passed because that they knew it was going to happen. Partially because she wouldn't accept the transplant that was required to save her life because she didn't want to have any blood transfusion, but she was also had bad health otherwise. So my mother was sitting there in the cafeteria, and she knew She didn't know I was an apostate, but she knew that I hadn't been going to the meetings and I wasn't interested in going back. And she hadn't been talking to me for maybe a year already then. But sitting there, I could see the indoctrination at work because she was sitting across the table from me in this cafeteria in the hospital in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And she was visibly scared of what I might say. There was a tension and a pullback and a just this discomfort. What is he going to say? The fear that the organization programs in just took over. And I wasn't going to say anything negative about her religion. I was actually just, I went there, like you had said, like you want your parents to see that you're doing okay. I wanted to see my aunt, and I went there and I was, dressed in normal clothes. I wasn't a drug addict. I hadn't, alcohol hadn't taken me down. I hadn't lost my home. I was a normal person who was capable. In fact, my dad even said, well, I don't know if you want to fly out and see, your aunt. It'll cost quite a bit of money last minute. And I, he just always thought that, I would be destitute the instant I left. But back to my point is that my mom across the table there looked scared of me. And that is an interesting thing. They've weaponized fear because, your son might say something that could threaten your faith. And that's not a reason to question your faith. That's a reason to shove away your son. It's weird.
Yes.
But you had an experience about that too. Sorry, I stepped on you a little bit there.
No, I want to get to that. I just also wanted to clarify. This isn't an indictment about women.
Oh, no, not at all. Yeah.
I have much worse things to say about my father if we ever wanted to sit down. And the way he treated the way Jehovah's Witnesses expect fathers to treat their children. I think that's also a pattern that isn't discussed enough. But there was 2 times I left in 2007 for real. When I celebrated my 30th birthday, I usually count that as the really am gone now.
Right.
26. My 30th birthday, 29, 30 were kind of like the years I was out. I wouldn't even say I was fading. I did not go to the meetings. I did not do anything. I was just trying to figure out a way to maintain my family, unsuccessfully, sadly. But a few years later, I would say 7 years later, my mother had some health issues and was in the hospital, was not sure how this operation she was about to take was going to go, because it was a pretty serious operation she was going to get. So, as Jehovah's Witnesses do, you get summoned to see the family member. I think this is a tale. So it's time for Jehovah's Witnesses, and kind of use that opportunity to, again, manipulate wayward children to come back to their religion.
Right. They pause shunning so that you can come see your mother before she might die.
Yeah.
Same thing with my aunt, and she did. They pause it for a minute. They take a brief break, and all the family members start texting you and everything else. It's really weird.
I think the hard thing with my mom is there is this only one conversation can happen with her throughout all these years, almost 2 decades. There's only one conversation I can have with mom, and it is one-sided, and it's hers telling me there's still time to come back to the religion. There's still time for you to come back. Everyone's just waiting for you to come back. The elders tell me that you will come back. I'm like, who are these people telling you that I'm coming back? No one knows me in your religion at this point. Been gone for a very long time. This almost, I would say, like delusion that I'm still the 23-year-old who went to Bethel waiting to come back.
Right.
And not this 47-year-old man that you see in front of you. There's like,
you freeze in that time, yeah, when they last saw you.
I remember I told you about that little thing I made for my mom in calligraphy. When COVID happened, she sent a picture and texted that to me and said, I'm still waiting for this person to come back. And I'm like, I'm married, I'm happy, I'm not even in Texas. And I sent a picture of myself, showing the full fantasy, showing all the tattoos, and was like, well, I'm waiting for my family to accept me back as I am. but it's so
Okay.
difficult to have this only one-sided talk over me, not allow me to say anything, not a single thing about my life. If I'm happy, if I'm sad, if things are good, if things are bad, these are not things that sadly Jehovah's Witness parents are allowed to express. And it's like I it's like the governing body doesn't specifically tell them don't even ask how they don't. It's just I don't know. It's just so weird that they take it to this extreme where to even say, Michael, are you doing okay? Is just
Impossible.
unfathomable to
Yeah.
them.
They can't do that. And that my whole conversation with my mom at that cafeteria and my dad, I had separate conversations. They were probably an hour long each. Not once,
Wow.
how are you, son?
Mhm.
What's going on with you? How are you? Are you all right? And none of that because they don't want to hear. And I will say I think that is I'm not sure I agree. I think that is something the governing body teaches
Okay.
because even under the new understanding with where their arrangement, excuse me, where they say you can say a greeting to a disfellowshipped person or a disassociated person. I think it just says disfellowshipped. You can say a greeting to them. It does not say you can say how are you doing. There's no asking for more information.
The last time my sister texted me, I actually said that. She texted me for the "Can I invite you to the memorial?" Which kind of led me to, to meeting you, by the way, because I'm like, "Where's this coming from?" All of a sudden,
Right.
and got
And
me
then you
started.
started looking at different videos online because you're kind of just
Yeah.
working over it in your
Like,
head.
what's going on? Like, usually
Yeah.
when my family reaches out, something has happened in the organization to
Right.
say, either stop or start. Um, and she just texted that, and I texted back, and I said, "I'm doing great. I'm married. I have a great life. I'm very happy." And I said, "These are things y'all never ask about." And no, I won't go to the memorial. Please don't text me that again.
I'm sure she didn't acknowledge that you said, you never ask about me.
No, I
No.
mean it's just, and I since I was never really in this position to shun a family member, I can't say. I mean, let's face it, I would have done it when I was in my 20s. I would have done it, most likely. But I never went through this time when I said, "How did I do that?" Uh, so I mean, I don't. I was never in that position, in other words, to shun a close family member. So I'm not really sure what the mental anguish is during that whole period.
Yeah. I have been in that position, and it wasn't a family member, but it was a friend, and we were really close. When we were little teenagers, we liked each other, and then when I was about 20, we weren't dating or anything, in the Jehovah's Witness, innocent way, but we were friends, and she got disfellowshipped, and she called me to say, "I'm sorry, I'm getting disfellowshipped. It's my fault." And I am she was and I'm just letting you know that I'm coming back and I value you, and it was a perfectly nice thing to do. And this shows how much the indoctrination really can make you say some foul things. And this is what I said to her. I said, "Well, you better hurry up." And this is one of those things where you're taking a shower and you go, "Oh, I can't believe I said that." But what I said was, "Well, Kim, you better hurry up and come back because the Bible says in the new system, we're not going to have any bad feelings. And so that means you're not even going to come to mind. I'm not going to miss you unless you get your together and come back." And it was such a mean, horrible thing, but it wasn't. I don't think I said, but I was 20. I was a little JW ministerial servant boy. It was a horrible thing to say. It was an abusive, awful thing to say to a young woman who was having a hard time. I won't go into what happened, but she was having a hard time at that time, and it was something that could have really damaged her mental health, and she eventually, she went back to the religion and she didn't, engage in any self-harm or anything, but that was a possibility then. When I talked to her after she came back, she was in a very bad place. And that is the strength of the organization. So I'm not just bagging on my mom or parents in general. I did it too. And it was truly reprehensible. It's absolutely awful.
Yeah, I feel bad about. I think I remember one time I saw a disfellowship person, the Blockbuster, and I just turned the other way. Like, that's about all I did. I was like, ugh.
Right.
Like, where was our human? It really sickens me that our humanity is so diluted because the governing body tells us our salvation is on the line based off this. If you ask a family member, what
Hmm.
are they always going to say? Well, I choose Jehovah. That's what they're trained to say.
Right.
That's what they believe. Um, and it just breaks my heart. The last thing I want to say about my mom is recently it came to my attention, and she had told me this before. I think I might have said on the last podcast, but that she would rather not even go to the new system anymore if I'm not there.
Oof.
And I'm like, well, I always ask myself if I should have pushed further on one of these occasions when she said, come back, and to say like, well, why are you wasting all this time now? Why have you wasted the last 20 years? I was 29 the last time you saw me, and I'm in my late 40s now. Last time you treated me as a real person. Um, why is the wasted time not what you're regretting? And it's like I want to shake them at this point. All of them. I want to. I. It's like I want answers from them on how they could do this for so long. I want at least some semblance of. I don't know if this needs to be in, but like I just want them to acknowledge me as a human being, which is the hardest thing I think. Is I personally, this is a harsh thing to say. I don't really want to see my family from here on out. If it's going to be, they can't even treat me like a normal human being, worthy of an ounce of respect, and not just the prodigal son in training, I guess, or
Right.
that they hope I am.
Well, what you said there was really interesting about how she doesn't want to be in the new system if she can't have you in the new system. And it's tragic because it
Hmm.
it shows how in conflict she is, and how much she cares about you. But I had
Hmm.
a similar conversation with my mom. And this was shortly after the hospice chat, where she saw that I wasn't saying anything bad about her religion, and she warmed up a little bit. Um, I had bought a truck, and she loves Ford trucks, and it's very similar to hers. And I sent her a little picture of it, and she's like, "Oh, that's great." And she's this not very tall, kind of a diminutive woman, and she'll be out there washing her Ford truck with her long little extendo thing and her step ladder. She does it all by hand. She loves it. And so I said I washed it by hand, just like you said, and we just were chatting a little bit back and forth, and it got to the point where she took me not talking bad about her religion as a sign that I was wanting to maybe come back. And then so she and my dad got on a call with me, and she said the similar thing. She's like, in the new system, I'll be so sad if you're not there. And it's so tragic. And I said, Mom, no, you won't. Because in fact, the Jehovah's Witness teaching is exactly the opposite, that you won't be sad. Like I said before, when talking to my friend who had been disfellowshipped, you won't be sad. You'll move on. And she said, well, at least the first 100 years I'll be sad. And I got a little Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy on this one, because I was like, and if you've read that book, you know what I'm talking about. Well, Mom, 100 years compared to an eternity is so small that it is nearly, or as near as makes no difference to zero. It's so insignificant. So what you're saying is, for an absolutely insignificant, nearly zero period of time, you will miss me. How does that make sense? You're going to be fine if this is the case. You won't miss me. And she thought about it. She was quiet. I'm kind of leaning into the voice a little bit here, because I'm frustrated. I'm talking about it. But with her, I was very intentionally very calm. And why would that bother you? And she kind of thought about it for a second, and then just said something like, "Well, it doesn't matter. I really want you." And she couldn't, she saw a puzzle that didn't make sense in her brain if she was to adhere to her beliefs. And then the shunning started right after that. Another message that she wouldn't talk to me. So I appreciate that story about your mom not wanting to be in the new system, but it shows another one of the holes of their beliefs. But it also shows how underneath all that, the shunning is still someone who has a natural affection that doesn't want to push you away.
Yeah. And and the armors they have to put on to keep it up.
Right.
At the expense of their mental health, I am pretty sure.
Oh, for sure.
And like at the end, like again, we're not here to talk bad. I feel a lot of pity for my mother. I blame the governing body for all of this.
Oh yeah.
I blame Jehovah's Witnesses organization for all of this. It's not they are. I've told many people who are not Jehovah's Witnesses and try to cast my family as the bad guys, and I said no, they're victims as much as anyone else. As much as I am, my parents are victims because they're being manipulated by a religious organization that doesn't have their best interests at heart. So,
right, and even though it's such a strange thing to try to get your brain around, or at least for me, my mind around, like how could you do that? I hear regular people or worldly people, as they're called, just if they say, "What's up with your parents?" Friends of mine, and who have children, they're like, they don't talk to you. You have murderers on death row whose parents talk to them. and they aren't talking to you. It's a very strange thing. But I'm kind of hoping that us conversing about this might be cathartic for other people feeling the same way or having the same experience. But also, when I was going through the kind of steps, how it went from very close with her to slowly, and even in my adult years when I was married, very close with her. We got along great. We go do errands together. We had fun. And her being a smart, thoughtful, kind person, and the governing body being able to control and make a mother shun their kid. And I when I went through the various steps of it in my head, how it went from close to completely shunned, I can see it working. And somehow, I don't know, that helped me a little bit go, okay, I can accept it, radical acceptance. It stinks, but I can go, okay, that's what that is, instead of just being in a nebulous, unfathomable state. I don't know.
And like for anyone that maybe much newer in this than me, with my almost 2 decades of dealing with these feelings, therapy does help. Talking to someone does help. And I know you're a big advocate for that too. Try to find someone who knows something about religious trauma and can help you with there. But I learned, there were periods that I tried to just keep it in, and so hard to relate this to people outside who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses, because it's hard for them to comprehend the whole lifestyle.
Yeah.
But that wasn't good for me to just keep it in. I've done better when I've talked about it, and at least gotten it out.
Right. And I found, I'll put a link there. There's a website in the US that helps people find therapists. And I know there's different websites all over the world, but this one, you could literally search for the specialties of the practitioners. And religious trauma is starting to get traction as a legitimate thing. I know my first therapist was clearly a Mormon once I kind of figured it out, and he was just of no use to me. So if you just have one bad experience with a therapist, don't give up on it. But he tried, but he was in a high control cult himself. So he needed the therapy that I needed. So once I got beyond that and I started going to a therapist who actually, she said, has, she can't divulge, much, but has other Jehovah's Witness patients and knows the lingo. You say disfellowshipped and she's not puzzled. She knows exactly what you're talking about. That's been just huge. And it is a little bit of a hard find. So, but if you can do it, my goodness, so much better, so much more use from those sessions than I was getting before. Huge difference. Well, anyway, I love my mother. I love my father. They are lovely people. But as we've said before, everything is worse inside a cult. And I had many parts of my childhood that were very good, but the fact is that it would have been better without this high control religion looming over. And it still looms over my parents and all of my siblings. I have five siblings. Forgot how many brothers and sisters I had for a second there. And they're all still in. And that's rough. And so, and I can remember how I was to disfellowship friends like that one I mentioned. And I can appreciate where they are, but we can all do better. And I hope someday they will, because I would still, welcome them into my life. It'd be great to have them back.
I think, to end on a positive note too, when I did see my grandmother, as much as I did not really have any meaningful time with my mother or father, seeing my two sisters again was way different than when my mom was in the hospital. I actually got to see them, have a little bit of a conversation, and remember what I loved about them.
Yeah.
Some aunts of mine, there was a little bit less of the guard up that was the last time. Remember what I loved about some of my family members. At least have something positive from the last 20 years of them, other than that. So I do love my mom and I do love my dad. I've almost texted my sister so many times. I just want you to listen to me once and say, is it possible that our teenage immigrant parents joined a cult and we were raised in a cult and told that they would not talk to us if we left, that this is what this is? Isn't it? As opposed to, this is what God's one truth that acts just like a cult, but isn't a cult, but acts just like them, you know? Like, just like, it was just our teenage parents didn't know what they were doing. One of my cousins recently sent me a picture of my mother and father, and it broke my heart that just like they saw me as 20-year-old, I kind of still saw them as in their late 50s, early 60s, and they're clearly people in their mid 70s now. And I've been haunted by that picture all week and just the lost time. So if by some way they ever do hear this, like, I do love you, and we could work on this relationship, but it's got to be both of us. So maybe one day we can get there.
Grew up in shadows, now I'm free. Dysfunction behind me, hope inside. New family found, safe and sound. Past was dark, but I'm not bound. Future